have a confession to make, rhetorical YouTube viewer. I never really played Duke Nukem 3D. I watched friends play it. When the internet became a thing, I did my research, but as far as playing it when it came out, not so much. See, this was, as I earlier alluded, a time before the internet, and the only games you played were either the ones you ended up with, or the ones you bought yourself. Ah, the days before the ESRB. So as a result of the aforementioned rule of playing what you end up with, I was a Doom kid. Duke was a cool guy, but I never felt comfortable about letting him in my house, you know? So at this point, depending on your age, cultural leanings, media saturation, and or affinity for Wikipedia, you're either nodding in agreement, seething at me with hatred, or you're completely confused. There was a Duke Nukem game before the one coming out? There were 3D games in the 90s? You may find yourself asking. And the answers to these questions in order are, yes, there were 3 games in fact, more if you count some really crappy non-canonical sequels and remakes, and no, 3D was the term used to describe any game that even vaguely gestured toward depth of field, something most, if not all, gamers of today take mercilessly for granted. For those who are confused, I offer a brief aside. A long time ago, there was a piece of programming tech considered cutting edge that involved generating a series of two-dimensional planes and rendering the game's 2D constructs as 3D. It was a smoke and mirrors trick years ahead of its time, and it was used to great effectiveness and massive critical attack by 2 companies that made 2 games that will live forever in gaming infamy. id Software, which of course made Doom, and 3D Realms, whose build engine technology, thank you Ken Silverman, was utilized to create the now timeless classic Duke Nukem 3D. Both games took on a lot of heat from the beta versions of Jack Thompson circling the pundit drain back in the day, Doom for having a great deal of gore and satanic imagery, and the Duke did not escape unscathed as it perpetrated a much deeper offense in the eyes of the American people. You see, Duke was a gory sod like the Doom guy, but Duke's game, en lieu of showcasing satanic imagery and offending the religious right, optioned instead to introduce the youth PC gamer market to a game that included flagrant, gratuitous nudity. As I said, this was before the ESRB. And that was the fundamental difference between them, and the main reason for the disparity in both sales and backlash. Doom got to slink away and live on. All it did was continue a tradition of inglorious violence that Hollywood had spent the last few decades instilling in the hearts and minds of the public. But Duke Nukem had tits in it. 16-bit pre-polygonal sprite-based tits, mind you, but for that, it was rigged so thoroughly against the coals that it guaranteed 2 things. 1, that every adolescent boy and his dog would eventually get his hands on it, and 2, that no sequel would ever catch fire in quite the same way. This is IMIO episode 16, Done with Duke? See, the most peculiar thing about the tone of the original game was that it was played completely straight. Duke Nukem 3D is the game that asked and answered the question, what if the eponymous blockbuster tough guy of every Hollywood movie was in the middle of an alien invasion? That's precisely what Duke was, and I suppose is. He was, and is, every cigar-chomping, gun-toting, misogynist empowerment fetish of the previous decade, right down to his plagiarism of the most famous lines of Bruce Campbell's career. Point 1 you should take from the above is that Duke was big business of his day, especially for the burgeoning electronic entertainment industry. He was such big business, in fact, that it gave 3D Realms the financial clout to solely pursue the development of what they'd planned to be a genre-redefining sequel, Duke Nukem Forever, or as it came to be known to all those who have spent the last, give or take, 14 years waiting for it, Duke Nukem Forever. A lot can be said about what exactly happened to Duke in the process of his slow burn to irrelevance. Suffice it to say that, over time, 3D Realms collapsed under the weight of their own efforts to meet their and the fans' expectations, and after a number of publishers signed on, then hastily backed out of putting their stamp on it. The new and current developer of DNF, Gearbox Software, has appeared to adopt a different strategy, namely, get it done, get it out, and pander as much as possible to the adolescent libido that made Duke Nukem 3D such a huge success, right down to the so offensive they hope you don't take it seriously sexualization and objectification of women. The slogan, wash hands after playing, says it all. But I must reserve judgment until I can play the game, because that's the sad truth of it. Of course I'm going to buy the Duke Nukem game. I'll probably have to buy 2, one to play and one to keep as a collector's item, because for good or ill, Gearbox has, by sheer virtue of getting Duke 4E published, contributed to the annals of gaming history, and I can only hope they treated such a milestone with respect. Though I doubt it. But hey, that's just my ignoble opinion.
Don't wanna be an American idiot. Don't want a nation under the new media. Hey, can you hear the sound of hysteria? The subliminal. Subscribe.
Thank you, Subscribosaur.